Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm very happy that I have one more time opportunity to be with the dear brothers and sisters of Ahlul Bayt Islamic Society of New England and Zirk MIT Shia Muslim Association. As Dr. Musallai said, this is the third lecture of a three-lecture series titled Sunni Views on the Imam Husayn alayhi salam movement. Today we are looking to more contemporary religious scholars. We look to the classical period. We look to the more secular or lay intellectuals or non-clerical thinkers, contemporary Sunni world, which most even from Egypt actually, and essentially the period in 19th century, maybe from 1920s, 30s to 1980s. Today, we are going to look with contemporary religious scholars. We start with some of the clerical thinkers, some of the important ones from that period from Egypt, and then moving to the contemporary ones, mostly United States. So this one will be sampled rather this today exhaustive presentation, but you see much that the themes of the two first lecture will be repeated, kind of we see them again because the same ideas they have. So for the blessing, I will start with this verse. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قل إنما أعظكم بواحدة أن تقوموا لله مثنى وفرادى. Say, I give you just a single advice that you rise up for God's sake in pairs or singly. The par excellence example of because this is the only advice God chosen from all the advices to directly give to us, and then Imam Hussein is the best exemplar of somebody followed this advice. As we said, this is a title of series. This is the three lectures, and then as we discussing in we can discuss this whole topic in three overlapping related ways, but they're a little bit different. We can look this spectrum of Sunni views respect to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the spectrum of Sunni views respect to Imam Hussein alayhi salam movement, the spectrum of Sunni views respect to Yazid ibn Muawiyah. The first one you don't see much difference and differentiation, although today I'll a little bit emphasize it more to the end. But the other two, yeah, there is a differentiation. The one the most you see the wider spectrum, and I think more informative or indicative actually is the last one. But we discussed that intricacies and different views some of those thinkers have regarding the movement because they have to reply or react or coming out of the context of the consensus which was developed from 6th, 7th century after Hijrah and was kind of there till 20th century, and then that's 19th, 20th century, that's some new thinking, new understanding, both among Sunnis from different perspectives, Shias also from different reasons, try to reflect on Imam Hussein's movement and have different understanding about it. So I start with the Sunni religious clerical circles, um, and and then we discussed last lecture with the more secular Western enclaves. Somehow, I mean, Western, there maybe writers and literary critics, playwrights, thinkers, philosophers. But this one is we are looking to the religious circles. We are in Egypt, and definitely so we have to look at Azhar. And then as this is all following up what work of the late Hamid and Ayat, the political thought in Islam. The best example of this, as we said, can be found in the some defunct Egyptian magazine called Review Conleva al-Islam, kind of the flag of Islam or something like that, which for 18 years was published. That's exactly the important period, 1947 to 1967. And then it was rivaling the organ or official organ of Al-Azhar, um, and presenting a religious view which a fundamentalist flavor. So it's a little bit maybe different on a wide range of issues relating to Islamic society and history, but enjoyed the advantage of freedom from the trammels that attach Al-Azhar to the official term. So maybe it wasn't, we have something like that. We have Maktab Islam in Iran, which was some group of clerical people and lay people publishing it from Allama Tabatabai, Al-Mutahari, Bazargan, Makarim Shirazi, very, very famous names. Everybody later on get some recognition was publishing in it. We have something similar in Iraq, again, the same period, For example, Allama Hussein Fazlullah, uh, and Muhammad Bagher Sadr, all were young students or scholars at that time. They were publishing. So you see the same trend, which they kind of coalesce around a publication, a journal, and publishing in it was seen in Egypt, Iraq, Iran. Um, Now, this one we start in an article in the issue of September 96, Muhammad Kamal al-Banna. I think it must be, sorry, I forgot to actually, I had one to see his relation with Hassan al-Banna. Hassan al-Banna was a famous founder of Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Uh, uh, I think this must be his brother. One of his grandchildren is I forgot his name. From daughter, he come to US, and there was controversy a few years ago about his visa. I think George Bush government didn't let him. But anyway, this Muhammad Kamal Banna is primarily concerned with clearing Imam Hussein of the charge of rashness in open hostilities against Yazid. You remember, I think the majority were Sunni thinkers, at least even the orthodox or established view was, okay, maybe we saw the exception, some so-called Ibn Arabi, but the view Ibn Khaldun had that, okay, Imam Hussein was justified to uprise against Yazid, but maybe his uprising, and that is Yazid wasn't a just man, a fair, deserved to be ruler, and Imam Hussein was a pious man and deserved to uprise against him. But the manner of uprising, because of the low number of people, it was ill-conceived. That was I mean, put it very sharply, was that kind of way stating the matter. But this is the one they start to answer. You saw that many of those seculars have very interesting new views. But you see, actually, later on, we see today, the modern clergy, the contemporary one, the ones in the US, they're relatively going backward. As I said, by the coming of Salafism and some traditionalism, some of the views have retrograded. But anyway, to prove his point, he places a special stress on Hussein's precaution in sending Muslim to Kufa beforehand. So he said it wasn't without thinking, without caution, without planning. So sending Muslim ibn Aqil as a scout to Kufa shows me he was reflecting on it, what's testing the situation, testing the water. Nevertheless, but again, even Muhammad Kamal Banna has sharing me the Mustafa Agad's judgment we saw last lecture, that ultimately Hussein could not escape his destiny as a rebel in the face of the worldly Bani Umayyah, Bani Abd Shams. So even if Muslim findings in Kufa had been negative, Hussein would still have gone ahead with his expedition. Because the point is, they say first Muslim reported things are good, calm, and then once things start to move, according to their interpretation, very late, very close to Kufa, he became aware things are not good in Kufa anymore, and the martyrdom of Muslim. Um, then still Imam Hussein head on, but they were thinking he would have head on again, going that direction no matter what. I mean, these are some of counterfactuals. We cannot easily discuss it. If it wasn't the case, what would happen if from the beginning Muslim hasn't said a positive report, Muslim and Naqil? Would Imam Hussein move toward Kufa? It's not very clear. Or where he would move. And then there are some disputing historical sources. One of them I discuss later on when I'm discussing Yasser Ghazi, which I think will be the largest discussion we have tonight. But anyway, I kind of let's report, because all of these now can be detailed discussed. First, their summary, and then sometimes their presentation or of history I don't think is accurate, but they're sincere, but sometimes then the judgment is based off that. But al-Banna reasoned for Hussein's innate tendency to rebellion smacks of the Shia conviction about the inherited moral qualities of Ali descendants. So al-Banna said, interesting, Hussein would have revolted in any case because he was a grandson of the Prophet, the son of Ali, the knight of Quraysh, and the hero of Badr, which is kind of the view with very, very dominant in the years before revolution and still after revolution, that the uprising would happen. I mean, as you see the first verse, whether he was alone or he have two or more group with him. So the whole intention wasn't a worldly success, but that standing to injustice and raising some at least an objection to what was the trend was. Now, a more interesting feature of his analysis, which again sounds uncanny coming from a Sunni writer, so you see some convergence. Even these are clerical. Unfortunately, I couldn't find his picture. Yeah, I searched for it. It is lending credence to the thesis mostly upheld by the Shias, as we shall see. Okay, we may not discuss it here, but as it is discussed in Shias, Hussein was aware of his inescapable fate as a martyr right from the beginning, from the time of Prophet, which is it is. It is very prominent in Shia view, and especially even as you move toward the metaphysical dimension, it becomes more prominent. But it is. We know that in many levels, at least, was hinted. And even Sunnis had hadiths from Imam Ali, um, uh, which kind of during wars, which Imam Ali going to Siffin or some other places, and near passing near Karbala, he referred, this is the place they would fight and martyred. So yeah, and then we know the many prediction, the dream Imam Hussein saw. So this is interesting, that Sunni writer and clerical emphasize that. And then Prophet had spoken about the dream he had seen in which Hussein that was foreshadowed. We have a lot even in relation to Hazrat Fatima when the giving birth to Imam Hussein. Another issue of the review carries the report of the proceed. So this was Muhammad Kamal Banna. But then there is another, uh, volume, the same in Maktab Islam, they discuss interesting topics, those magazine for a while was publishing. And then in one another issue, have articles from three people, these are much important and influential in the whole uh, Islamic, movements after themselves. In another issue of the review carries the report of proceedings of symposium. So it was a symposium attended by such well-known advocates of a fundamentalist or socially committed look of Islam. So the Islamic one of them is Muhammad Ghazali, then Abdul Rahim Fuzah, and Muhammad Abu Zahra. This Muhammad Ghazali is very important. For a while, I think he was the greatest Sunni scholar. And then he was invited in Tehran too after revolution, and he did a speech before Friday prayer. He was very influential, very good, very. I mean, if he was alive, could be more influential. After him, Yusuf Qardawi kind of replaced him. If you go to the Sunnis, who's your. But Salafis, I'm pretty sure this dispute. I mean, as the role of Saudi and Wahhabism and Salafism grow from 1980s. Gradually, these scholars were eclipsed. But Yusuf Qardawi moved to the Dubai Emirat from Egypt again, and then he initially was good, but then gradually, when his son seems inclined towards Shiism, he's got hostile. And so Yusuf, I mean, I say the name Muhammad Ghazali before Yusuf Qardawi was like, so I'm Mutahari or somehow. But Ghazali was bigger in one sense because I'm Mutahari was the greatest thinker, but he didn't stay to Hausa to go up on the ranks of Marja'iyya, stuff like that. We're talking, Muhammad Ghazali can talk, for example, something like Ayatollah Khoui. I mean, not saying intellectually, yeah, I mean, I think it's comparable with Ayatollah Khoui, Shia Islam. Um, so they discuss this group, I mean, in the symposium, to discuss three specific questions. The fact they're discussing these questions are interesting. This is his Ghazali, Muhammad Ghazali, and then, he's one of the most revered, even, Gil Kippel, when wrote the book, is one of the most revered sheikhs in the Muslim world. Yeah, he was very good and, died 1996. And then this is Muhammad Abu Zahra. He's also famous. He occupied a number of positions. He was a lecturer of Islamic law at Azhar University and Professor Kainer University. And these features, some of these are both Hausa and university teachers, Islamic Research Academy, and so on. And the third one, I couldn't find the picture. So the questions they arise: was Imam Hussein motivated by worldly desires and political ambitions? Did he, challenged by his revolt, qualify the competent ruler? This is really logically break it down at this in the perspective of Sunnism. Did he employ the right method to attain his goal? So discussion replies to the first and second questions are negative. So Imam Hussein was not worthy desires, but he doesn't want to become a ruler, political ambitions. He revolted somebody which he wasn't competent ruler, wasn't not a just ruler, doesn't elected, because they have some different views how the rulers are elected, who become legitimized. So they clearly in this way they get the answer which is make them close to Shiism. And is it the third one, the disputed question even from the Khaldun orthodoxy after whether he was that elite ill-considered uprising, did he employ the right method to attain his goal? And the third, they give answer positive. That's important. For more or less the same reasons as those adduced by secular writers. So you see, those secular writers, which we saw last lecture, which were interesting, had their effects. I mean, I'm not saying who affected the other one, but I think they are influential. But characteristically, they couch their arguments not in terms of criteria extraneous to their cultural background or the Islamic perspective. Those secular writers think rationally, modernly, revolution, even Marxistic, some of them. But they have to justify it and find examples from Islamic history, Quranic injunctions. But by repeated references to analogies from Islamic history and Quranic injunctions, for example, the Ghazali justifies Imam Hussein's seemingly suicidal challenge to overwhelming force of Yazid by likening it to the bravery of Anas ibn al-Nazar at the Battle of Uhud, who upon seeing the Muslim troops retreat, sallied towards the enemy lines, shouting, "I smell the paradise from beyond the Uhud mountain." He alone moved forward, kind of fight with them, martyred, but kind of stopped the Mushrikeen army, Quraysh army going forward. This is an important question. As I said last lecture, this is the question for what happened after October 7. I'm not saying the method or what exactly in detail, but the whole thing uprising or attacking something which is overwhelming you, a bigger overwhelming force. And then such men conclude Ghazali, and that's the reason you see even the contemporary American thinkers, especially those who have some Palestinian bent, uh, this issue of Imam Hussein movement has become more urgent to reconsider and somehow to own it. I mean, to own it with own an interpretation which is matching or fitting Sunni views, owning it for themselves. Like Omar Suleiman, which has been mentioned last lecture, and briefly we saw today. Such men conclude Ghazali care more for being consistent with themselves and their God than for the practical outcome of their actions. So these are the people who go with the principles than the necessary outcomes. And the Western history of, I mean, not Western rational history of morality is you have two principles for guidance. Why we decide to do something. One is the principle of utility. You look to the outcome, and if the outcome in some way you define it positive, good, it's a calculus done. What is the cost? What is the benefit? Now we call it cost benefit analysis, but it was called by Jeremy Bentham and then John Stuart Mill, utilitarian calculus. That's usually a calculus a governor, a ruler, country should usually those states as apparatus of states should take, if and then they should maximize utility for the maximum number of people. That's the ideal, which they don't usually for them sometimes for benefit themselves. But this calculus of utility breaks down in examples like here. And then you have the other side, the Kantian duty, categorical imperative. You do something, it is right, irrespective of the consequence. But the problem is that categorical imperative is not so simple to find what his example is, because except you intend to do good or don't do to the others what you don't want to be done to yourself or vice versa. Because when you define a category, okay, I should never lie, then you see it some cases lying is justified. Or I should so you see is a very or you say you never should kill, but you see there are some cases justice required to kill. But still, I think there are cases people act, at least psychologically, but by the basis of principle, not an outcome. They go behind a missile launcher to defend their country, but they know definitely it's very probable they would die immediately because by turning on the missile launcher, firing it, they will counterattack, which we had in this 12 days war. And then I think, interestingly, these are like if you're engineering technology, there's singularities or mathematics system, but usually these are the one change the history because there's so much dedicated to the cause. It seems a little irrational, but irrespective of the outcome. But actually, by acting like that, they will get the outcome too. They get the biggest outcome. You see Socrates, maybe even Jesus, or I mean, this is a Christian narrative. And then, Imam Hussein's victory come not the day, as we said, after Ashura, but came maybe 60, 70 years later, and the whole span of history. So this is Ghazali's saying, care more for being consistent with themselves and uh, their God than for practical outcome of their actions. And then the last one I think you look is Khalid, Muhammad Khalid, Egyptian writer, religious political topics, many books. And then he says, uh, uh, highly idealistic book of Abna Rasul fi Karbala, the sons of Prophet at Karbala, is distinguished by its elaboration on the background of the drama as a conflict between Ali's conception of the caliphate as an institution which should embody the loftiest virtues of the Prophet's era and the Umayyads' ruthless determination to reduce it to instrument of sheer domination. Which is, you see, this has become so close to the view of Shia. That's the heart of it. I mean, what the caliphate should be, not even necessarily who should be caliph, how it should govern, and why it's important. More than a third of the book is taken up by contrasting the honest, straightforward behavior of the Alids with the artful practices of the first two Umayyad caliphs. I'm not sure even his book is translated to Farsi. So, contrary to the fundamentalists, Khalid not only does not absolve Muawiyah, but holds him as ultimately responsible for bloodshed Karbala. Yeah, this is the difference because those traditionalists consider Muawiyah as Sahaba as usually somehow absolving him. But because he's working with the issue of caliphate and who's responsible really by the changing institution, so blames Muawiyah the first. And then also by appointing Yazid as his successor, Muawiyah not only violated his peace treaty with Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein's brother, but also offended the collective conscious uh, uh, of the faithful at a time when a number of the capable companions of the Prophet were still alive and be considered candidate for the caliphate. Uh, but such historical niceties become irrelevant in the light of Khalid's agreement with the fundamentalists. The bloody conflict between the Alis and Umayyads was inevitable in any case. Um, um, okay. In support of these theses, he quotes a tradition so dear to Shia hearts, according to which Ali predicated to Saint martyrdom on the way to Siffin battle. Yeah, that's the one I said is the Sunni books too. When Imam Ali saw the plain of Karbala, he's reported to have said, "Here's the place of his grandchildren, or and his son, his grandchildren descend on bloodshed." And so again, you see this convergence is interesting. Thus, the Epic of Karbalä was not one act played beginning at the 10th of day of Muharram and ending on the same day. It was a long story which started many years before 61 after Hijrah and resulted stretch over many years after that. We have a Shi'i hadith from Imam Sadiq that okay, maybe the dates I'm not sure, but look, for example, Imam Sadiq said Ashura was or Karbala was on Monday, and then they repeated that, and they told him no, no, it wasn't Monday, it was Friday. But Imam said no, it was Monday, and then the district go back because he said Ashura really didn't start in the 10th of Muharram of 61, but it started, at 28, 29 of Safar of 11. It was the day of Saqifa. He implied really the whole deviation started in Day of Saqifa. Okay, this is very maybe ultra Shi or Shi view, but at least this author noticed the causes, the deviation cannot happen suddenly like that. It is a long history. The whole uh, stealing or removing Ahlul Bayt from their position started Saqifa and continued. Uh, so the greatest lesson of Karbala is that self-sacrifice should be admired for its own sake, just as right should be prized as a thing in itself. So, self-sacrifice becomes a virtue irrespective of its outcome. The memory of Imam Hussein's martyrdom should be an occasion for jubilation. Okay, here he's different, again, uh, always there are some aspects close, some different. Occasion for jubilation, not mourning, but just as the great Eid of the Muslims on the 10th day of month of pilgrimage, which is Eid al-Adha. Equally, reminiscence of an act of sacrifice is celebrated by happy festivities. This incidentally is what some Cairns have been doing for centuries, although not in the militant mood envisaged by Khalid. I mean, I'm not sure what exactly ceremony Qahari is, or is it because of that fasting of the 10th of Muharram they do, but sometimes their ceremonies are different, sometimes similar. Sometimes maybe Shias, Sunnis mix, Fatimids with their. So they celebrate the birthday of Prophet Muhammad much more than any other Sunni places they do. So I'm not sure of her, but okay, that's the interesting one. So if we can summarize both the secular and the clerical ones, we can summarize the foregoing several by saying that all Sunni writers mentioned here are unanimous in the rejection of the Arabis. So this line, apologia for Yazid as honorable man. So at least we moved a good direction. That kind of has gone, or had been gone, except the Salafis are reviving them. They also contested the Khaldun's verdict that Hussein's adventure was based on his erroneous estimation of his strength, most of them, and was therefore a wrong move because they maintained that matters should not be judged on pragmatic and utilitarian grounds. Otherwise, the central meaning of Hussein's martyrdom will be lost. So again, the calculus and sometimes is not, as sometimes the guy who in the battlefront sticks is alone holding the line, that's its fate is certain. So some writers praise Hussein for moral, others for political reasons, but in the course of their arguments, they all make a number of significant concessions to the Shia theology or convergence, not look on it concessions. They also help us to understand some aspects better. Or Imamology, apparently without thinking out their logical conclusion. Yeah, they were seeking truth. They were not talking, okay, if I say this benefits Shias or vice versa, we just need to go following the truth. None of these writers, however, bases their argument on a critical analysis of historical text with the view to discovering inconsistency and inaccuracies. Okay, this is the one they accepted the sources. That historical revisionism of Western scholarship wasn't its peak and hasn't reached the shores of Islamic world. And we are passing that. We need to look some of the sources, but that's important to know the influence of power on the knowledge produced, but that's another story. Rather, they all rely on individual speculation, simply read their present thoughts into conventional sources. Okay, that's the first group. This second group, I'm not doing a thorough discussion, but this guy has a good presence in social media, especially YouTube. He's very Salafi, even and Wahhabi, and then even nowadays there is a guy famous as Daniel Haqiqatjou, is Iranian and Sunni, claims Sunni, graduate Harvard. He does debates, and now the recent months he's really strongly against these fellows. He's strongly debating this guy. But this guy was, as I said one time before, used to come now and then say something about against Shias, right, wrong and right, sometimes mockingly, and then people debating him. Although recently he's a little bit lower the flame. He's still doing it, not as much as like 2017, 18, 19. Maybe after rapprochement with Iran and Saudi, some of them are put down. He's very hadith minded. And then one time even he said, I'm ordering coffee, and then start to read it. I mean, I was anticipating every now and then bringing a hadith to start to make something out of it. He didn't do that. But for a while, it was advertising, okay, I am, because she is talking about Imam Hussein. And then it seems getting attraction or attention or question by Sunni Muslims. So that these guys, they need to answer questions. Uh, yeah, it was a clip. I wanted to bring it, but I forgot. There was a clip recent days that some Sunni guys said, we didn't know what's happening in Karbala. And that's, I know, I understand what Shias are crying. It's very sad. And then he was very affected. But it seems the questions are raised because now we have social media after Iraq, after toppling Saddam in 2003. The whole issue of Shia Sunni, at least seeing the Arba'in demonstration, other stuff, they're getting aware. There is something like that is there. Even the Americans now know something about Shia Sunni. Uh, and then he come and said one day, okay, I'm going now tell you what's the true story is, not as the way this Shia said. And then I wrote a book, and then so I ordered it. But look, let's see. Look, I kind of get the gist of it, but he's very, at least, don't call him Salafi, he's very Wahhabi Ahl al-Hadith, as only Hadith is important with them. Hadith, Bukhari is like Quran. Okay, but look, the manipulation of historical facts and distortion of the image of Islam is not a new phenomenon, especially with matters that rouse emotion in Islamic history. I'm personally not aware of one that is more appealing to storytellers than martyrdom of Imam Hussain. So you see, indirectly wants to criticize Shias, they're making stories. These are, for his martyrdom was truly a tragedy that has caused tears to flow and uprising to erupt. So you see, he agreed this part. He gives this part. However, another disaster is that the martyrdom of Hussein has developed into the Greek tragedy, one that pushes away those that are rational due to the fabrications and distortions that have tarnished his great image, which I think I agree with him. We'll see at least. I don't put all of his parts, but I put one point. I used it before in one of the talks. I think it was Farsi, but I agree with him. Does Al Hussein need fabrications to make him great? Is he not a leader of the Utah paradise? If this is the case, then it is high time we strip ourselves from subjective preconceptions and learn of his story through an academic lens. In Shia Islam, I told you in 19th century, Sheikhia was important. And then there are some peoples like Mullah Ali Agha Darbandi. Ali. Oh, okay, sorry, excuse me. Rasul Jafari wrote a book of him. Unfortunately, some of the Shia, I can say later, but now I said, look, some of the Shias were not careful, especially after Safavids, that which sources they are used. And then there were some Ghali Shias, extremist Shias, exaggerating Shias. Some of those sources, they want to include everything, and they absorb them to the body of Shia tradition. And then that really has tainted or contaminated. But anyway, I will show you the example. This book, as short it may be, shall be sufficient for the reader, for the lengthy versions are riddled with fabrication. If God wills, this book will provide the reader with a clear perspective and what exactly transpired. Okay, this back cover is promising, which is part of the foreword. But the point is this: his method is very hadith driven, and then because he only accepts Bukhari, he's just copy and paste. And then also you read the whole story of Imam Hussein is the disjointed hadiths, because much of the story of Karbala is not the hadiths and is the storybooks. And then they sometimes distinguish, or emphasize. For example, Yasser Qazi said, okay, this is a storybook, this is also a hadith. So it's not only history. So when it's a hadith, it's more authentic. But the way this guy did, he go to Bukhari, any hadith regarding Ashura or Karbala, fine, he copy pasted, and then story is disjointed, because hadiths are by narrations are not a continuum, and then they separate the hadiths from the akhbar or historical one. But you can see, for example, the type of thing he put in his book. So I'm not reviewing his book, but you see the attention. For example, Al-Bukhari narrated that so and so from Anas ibn Malik. Anas ibn Malik was a very companion of the Prophet Muhammad, which was old, and it says he was present when, yeah, actually we see it here, was present when they brought the head of Imam Hussein to the court of Ibn Ziyad. So the head of Hussein ibn Ali was brought to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad in Kufa. It was placed on a tray. He then tapped it and commented about his looks. Anas said he was the closest to Messenger of God in his features, and he was a wasma dye. Okay, this hadith is very soft. It doesn't say this head is placed on the tray and doesn't condemn, and then just say, okay, I looked to his face, and then I remember which he must seen. I was saying before too, the time of Ali in Medina, but then he was a face very similar to Rasulullah, and then maybe his eye has a wasama, a black-leafed Yemeni plant. Maybe I don't know. We're sure the eye, uh, you know. Anyway, sorme or something like that. But the more complete one, Malik, Anas ibn Malik really objected to Yazid. He said, because Yazid hit the lips, and he said, look, the lips you're hitting by the stick. I saw Prophet Muhammad was kissing it. So he really strongly object. But Bukhari, I think, is worst of all. Always truncate, select, and it's popular because it's farthest from Shiza. It is heavily edited. You find in the complete hadith, the other book, you see he's always smoothing it, taking the sharp corners out, and then make it ambiguous. Okay, another one. For example, Al-Husayn ibn Ali was killed when he was 8 years old. Okay, this is very neutral. I mean, most of the book is like that. He has hadiths, sometimes some also from Tabari. But the part I think he has a point is this. I said it before, and that's important for us when we're narrating story of Ashura, do it good. And it's a little bit related to what Yasser Ghazi actually says, but mistakes. I mean, I don't anticipate from this guy to be very fair, scientific, but Yasser Ghazi get a PhD from Yale too. And so, and he's good when he's talking about other stuff. But look, the appendix was compiled in order exaggeration statistic, appendix 2. The appendix compiled in order for the reader to fathom the sheer amount of manipulation of the storytellers and fabricators in regard to Martyr Hussein. This simple list of statistics will make the whole picture clear to those unobjectified. Abi Mekhnef, which is the chief prominent uh, historian of the narrative Karbalä, which I showed. He is the first Muslim historian which have books from him. He's a prominent, uh, very early historian in Islam, and then he was expert in events in Iraq. And then because Karbalä happened in Iraq, he's expert in it, but he's expert in Safain, Jamal, Mukhtar, anything else happened in Iraq. He's a very meticulous historian, man. And then he died very early, just the beginning of Abbasid, the time of seventh Imam, I think he passed away, uh, stated that Hussein had 32 knights and 40-foot men with him. So this 72 maybe come from him. And that they were all killed, okay? And then Tabari we have, but we don't have the book itself. We have the report from his book from Tabari. And then recently, Yusufi Gharavi and some other people tried to reconstruct the original Abi Mekhnaf by going to the extract from different books which is survive and put them together and kind of to give a complete picture. And then Abi Makhnaf said that many of the Umar ibn Sa'd consist of 4,000 men. So Umar said 4,000, but I think maybe Shem being some more, so the number should go higher. But the later rendition that is attributed to Abi Makhnaf states the army of Umar ibn Sa'd consists of 80,000. Okay. Now, but look, this 150 is another book, Imam Hussain. So what's going on? This is important. This is one of the unfortunate thing happens. This is the table I want to show, but we have to know what is happening. There is a Abi Makhnaf storybook, which is really the historical source of events in Karbala, which Abi Makhnaf won, which is, I think, the authentic, very basic, not much miraculous things. But then we have another one, few centuries later, the people start to call, look, 9th to the 10th century. They call Abi Makhnaf But it wasn't Abi Makhnaf. It was another Makhnaf somebody wrote, used the Abi Makhnaf and add many things to it. And many, many centuries have passed, and this is around the early Safavid or so on. And then they call it Abi Makhnaf, and that have many addition, exaggerations in it. And unfortunately, people mix them. And the original, why the guy did it? I think guy's smart. The original Abi Makhnaf is lost. And then he made up another Abi Makhnaf, and then he can sell it or push it through on like the people make a poem and coin it in the name of Hafiz or Khayyam. But then the thing he's showing in this guy is showing is that look, if you go to original Abi Makhnaf, which as narrated in Tabari, and they go to he call it Al-Qumi, but Ibn Babway, if you go to Al-Amali Ibn Babway, and then we go to this new Abi Makhnaf, which called Maqtal al-Imam Hussain. But this Abi Makhnaf was used a lot in even Iran till recently. And they didn't distinguish this is not the original Abi Makhnaf, but usually they don't care too. Like some Mullah Ali Agha Darbandi, especially after Shaykhi, they have some special views, which another lecture maybe have to go through that. But the problem is says, look, this is the early historical book. This is okay, still classical one, 4th century big Shia scholar. And this is much later, close to Safavid. And it's anonymous author. It's not Abi Makhlaf. It's something else. The books you compare are different. But one of the statistically shows is the numbers of people have been killed. These are the martyrs of Karbalä, the members of the Imam Hussain companion. But the number of people they killed from the other. Look, I think the best one is Ibn Yazid is a good example, and we can go forward. Ibn Yazid in the original Makhnaf killed one person from the army of Yazid. In the Amali of Sheikh al-Saduq, which is not one of these best, and Sheikh al-Saduq, although he's a big name, is not as scrupulous as or careful as Kholaini, and then he has different books. Amali is not he's the most uh high level books. Amali was the what has 18. Now made it 18. Okay, 18 is a little high, but then you got the second Ami Makhnaf, make it 180. And then even look, I don't want to go any name, but some of the Zohair ibn Qayn, it was important companion, I was saying, but it make it 120. It's impossible, especially the type of war is impossible, And then I'm sure Mullah Ali Agha Bandi, these are even multiplying. And then as a whole idea is that we don't need, I mean, their importance is not a movie, it's not a Rambo movie that, I'm sorry to say it, but it's not that how many they kill from the other side. It is the taslim and the devotion to the cause. And we make it these details, make it irrational. Uh, you know, and it's not easy. When I tell maybe these guys only killed not as much number if there are 72, other the others are not listed, but maybe they did kill 4,000 from the army. Maybe it was few hundred, even less. People are not happy. So I think this part, although this guy is usually hostile, critical, at least we have to give at least uh, accept what he said. Okay. Because I'm a little bit want to say the historiography of the Karbala because this will be related. So I read it fast. Here is a summary from another work. The first detailed source of the Karbala, as I said, tragedy is Maqtal al-Hussein, the killing of Hussein, which when we were saying that, especially in America, when we read, I mean, in non-Iranian context, when usually Ashura people read the Maqtal. Uh, and Iran is also becoming recently customary. So Maqtal is some recently I noticed they're really making the reconstructed Maqtal. Some read Lahov, but they pick up Maqtal and read. So Maqtal, a compilation reports of the Kufan author Abu Makhnaf. He was a very great historian, and because Yasser Ghazi, the way he's treating him, is hurting the whole. I would say the word. Citing and then he's citing his grandfather, a contemporary to the events, who in turn had collected reports from eyewitnesses to Karbala. Abu Akhnaf book is lost, but its content preserved in some of our earliest historical sources, including Balazuri, which is not very pro-Shi, Tabari, which is very fair, Ibn Asam al-Kufi, Ibn Abd al-Rabah, Ghazi Noman, this is maybe Smiley, Abu al-Faraj Isfani, as-Saduq, which we were discussing. An area of later Shia writings are based on these and other lost sources in Shia hadith collections. They include the stories of Iraqi author Sheikh al-Mufid, Ibn Tawus. Lahov, you see a little bit additions. and then Sibt al-Jawzi, which is Sunni, but very, as we saw yesterday, very against Yazid, and Yemeni Tayyibi died. This is Zaidi or no, actually Ismaili, Idris Imaduddin Ismaili, and the Iranian Safavid encyclopedias Farhad Ghoddoussi. So this is the kind of and then we come to Rosat al-Shahada, and after that, the genealogy of this Maqtas. But you look, even the Karbalä, as Aymatari said, is most authentic one. And then the one is even Yasser Ghazi mostly used. Tabari has a very detailed uh, narration, even in Karbalä. And then interestingly, we had it for Tawabin and Mukhtar too. So Tabari get a lot of attention. And then there was some presentation in the Zek that I forgot the name of the presenter, but you know, uh, when you go to the Tabari, he presented these events in Karbala with utmost respect and poeticity. Is not like other chapters, he seems very indifferent. I mean, there are arguments, maybe Tabari has Shia inclinations. I'm not pushing it, but I think the greatest unappreciated Iranian scholar. He is reading commentary, Quran, and history. In fact, he's underappreciated. Let me use the word underappreciated. But look, so the sources are these. There is a narration on Bagar which was there very small through Amara Dohni, Tabari narrated. There are some questions. This is very brief narration from Bagar. Then there is, so I want to say just historically, then there is an Hussein ibn Abdul Rahman, which it seems somehow was aware, and then somehow with some intermediate rich category. There are some other notes, but the most important one, Abi Makhnef. And then there is Abd Kalbi, which is very famous. So all the chains are there, historicity and how they're connected. Abi Makhnef collected earlier, and then Kalbi, and then Tabari. So that the story of Karbala is very solid. Now I come to because we're going to the second part of our talk. Coming to the contemporary Sunni scholars, I kind of mentioned maybe only two. I will go with Yasser Khasi a little bit longer, but then I don't know. I mean, I have to. I was selective. They have some talks you can find internet. Umar Suleiman had something even recently. Ashura for Muharram 2025, 1447. And I think the things in Palestine made them to really reflect more, because now they need something, some example to motivate the Ummah, or they're kind of getting definitely not happy of the silence, inactivity of majority of Sunni world. But regarding him is important, he's born 1986, Islamic scholar, civil rights activist, president of Yaqin Institute, which I think the most important Sunni thinking institute, adjunct professor of Islamic studies at Methodist Southern Methodist University, which is a Christian university, and resident scholar Valley Ranch Islamic Center, co-chair, and Dallas at Thinking Thanksgiving Square. I'm a bit brief from him, but he has two. You search internet, you can find two recent talk from him. One is loving Hussein and hating Yazid, which one of the audience last lecture kindly sent some comment from it. So he emphasizes, so you can see all the three topics of Imam Hussein himself, his movement, and Yazid. Somehow he's here. Umar Suleiman emphasizes a deep love and reverence for Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, viewing him as a beloved figure in Islam. He highlights the importance of expressing love for Imam Hussein in a manner consistent with the guidance of the Prophet. They mention Hadith of Sunni. I would say some maybe when I go to Yasser Qazi a little bit more. In a Yaqin Institute publication, Suleiman addresses how Muslims should approach the tragedy of Karbala, where Imam Hussein was martyred. He underscores that Imam Husayn uprising against Yazid was a significant act rooted in standing against oppression, though he notes that some Sunni scholars view the rebellion as a strategic mistake due to potential for chaos, despite acknowledging Yazid's moral failing. So you see, he cannot completely dissociate himself for that ill-conceived uprising thing, because that's really entrenched. Suleiman encourages Muslims to honor Imam Hussein's sacrifice and legacy by focusing on the values of justice and resistance to tyranny that his movement embodied while grounding of this love in prophetic teachings. It does not advocate for ritualistic mourning practices common in Shia tradition, so that part is not there. It's just more secular remembrances, but promotes a reflective appreciation of Hussein's courage and principled stand. And Yazid ibn Muawiyah is critical but nuanced. Again, he describes him as a bad guy and a morally bankrupt ruler, acknowledging the tragedy of Karbala's significant injustice, where Yazid forces killed Imam Hussein, the Prophet's grandson. However, Suleiman advises against cursing Yazid outright. I mean, cursing per se, what if not downplaying his wickedness? I mean, I'm okay, maybe I don't curse, but at least I know his guys. I mean, you may don't curse directly Netanyahu, but at least you shouldn't forget who he is. Citing the possibility that Yazid may have repented, which aligns with the traditional Sunni approach that avoids definitive condemnation of historical figures. Repentance is uncertain. Again, that we all discuss this issue of repentance, which again, another classical scholar said, there is no sign he repent. There is no sign. And this stance reflects a cautious balance, recognizing Yazid's role in the tragic events while adhering to the principle of withholding absolute judgment. Suleiman's position contrasts with more emotive responses, such as those found in some Shia perspectives that explicitly curse Yazid, and instead calls for a focus on hating the actions and oppression associated with Yazid's rule rather than ritualistic condemnation. But yeah, I'm not too much myself in ritualistic condemnation because at the end, ritualistic condemnation should end up focusing to what is on the main focus on injustice and fighting injustice. So if ritualistic condemnation just condemn Yazid and not going beyond, is the same these Holocaust memorial centers. Never again, but never again what? Never again cannot stop the famine in Gaza. What's the use of never again? If never again is useful, going to Holocaust memorial centers is to not have, if something similar happened, we stand against it. The same for what Shia and Sunni, if you, the sake of, this is not for the sake of just ritually remembering something, is for standing for justice, standing for the truth and against opposing against tyranny and justice. I mean, it could be environmental. You see company polluting, or for example, big company is abusing the rights of workers, or damaging the environment of some people who are living from South America. Fighting against that, I think, is walking in the footsteps of Imam Hussein. In another lecture, which is longer, and actually he discussed in detail the events in Karbalä. So I didn't go through that because we are not looking to the historical detail. That's interesting. It's recent, longer. The previous one was 20 minutes. This is about 70, 80 minutes. But this is the first one. The meaning of victory, martyrdom. So he at the end reflects on the martyrdom I was saying, emphasizing the profound spiritual and moral lessons derived from the sacrifice at Karbala. It described Hussein's martyrdom as a moment where his soul was reunited with the Prophet Muhammad, highlighting the concept of Shahada, martyrdom, as a victory despite physical death. So he's going a little bit deeper to the meaning of martyrdom. He makes it uniting his soul, Imam Hussain, to Prophet Muhammad. He kind of wants to give some prominence to Shahada and then say, irrespective of outcome, the fact he was uprise for the sake of God and goes through Shahada. So, because this is a question for in Palestine too. Many people are martyred without apparently any achievement of worldly achievement. So he has to go back to the roots. Because for Sunnis, mostly Shahada was the conquest, the wars, the Medina was their successful, and then the attacking Iran, or they didn't have this kind of Shahada, which a lot of uprising Shia we have, which the outcome was of martyrdom. And then despite that, people again did it and again, many Abbasids. Suleiman underscores that the cruelty of oppressors, such as those responsible for Hussein's death, reveals the courage and ideals figures like Hussein, whose legacy of standing against tyranny inspires across generations. So he wants to make it to inspire, standing against tyranny, which for him definitely what's going in Palestine is important. emphasizes that even in solitude or defeat, look, alone or defeat, martyrdom preserves the soul and upholds the values, ensuring a lasting victory against oppression. So he kind of adopting some of the Shia views now, and it's not that ill-conceived one. Now, other those modernist Sunni thinkers also emphasize that. So he's going to resources Shia and the modern Sunni, and then giving a new interpretation. This is 2025. Suleiman recounts the narration where a man from Iraq asked Imam Ali about the impurity of mosquito blood. If you kill the mosquito on your body, if the blood comes out, it's not najas. But we'll see some of these very minute issues of fact was important for some of these recently converted, but ignoring all the big things, big matters. So he quoted Imam Ali, prompting a rebuke on focusing on trivial matters while ignoring, and then he says the same generation, the same people later on completely ignore or they were not sensitive in the justice's killing of Imam Hussain. Um, uh, which he mentioned him, the Imam Hussein was sweet basil of the Prophet. The point is this, we have this one, for example, the Quran recitation. I'm not going Quran recitation, but how to makhraj al-huruf, how to recite it exactly, how to make your sound louder. Some of it, I think, even was emphasized in Umayya's, but without knowing the meaning and concept and applying it or ignoring the more important thing. So, what is the goal of all of these? Establishment morality in you, and submission to really the will of God. And that's what I'm saying. Sometimes with the stories we have, those sorcerers in the Moses story and Pharaoh, to 5 minutes before they were completely different people that never followed Sharia, but in 5 minutes they completely switched because they saw the miracle, they completely shake them to the core. Now they're completely submitted to the will of God. They're willing to lose one hand and leg and martyrs with a very harsh way. That kind of faith, that kind of change, that kind of transformation, that kind of standing with truth and morality is needed. So sometimes we lost in the so much details of hair splitting, and then kind of I think is the border of obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm not saying you shouldn't follow the Sharia. We should, but and then we see it at the extreme in the Jewish law. I mean, I saw the lady asked if I'm working in the school, I'm entering the grades of the students. And if the grades are not good, if I'm entering the grades, is it ghaiba? Honestly, he asked the rabbi that in England, in US. And then let alone the other ones mixing this food and that. But okay, what about the justifying the killing human beings over there's why 80%, 90% of the polls coming back, they are not supporting it. Anyway, this story serves as a critic of misplaced priorities within the Muslim community, urging reflection, Omar Sullivan, urging reflection on significant issues like oppression and bloodshed, particularly in contemporary context where Muslim suffering persists. So he wants to push it. He wants to get something from history of Islamic world that can makes his Sunni audience or people react. He warns against becoming numb to injustice, or getting caught up in minor religious debates, which distract from addressing major crises affecting the Ummah Muslim community. So we finished Omar Suleiman. Now we come to Yasser Ghazi. Yasser Ghazi has few talks, and I said I used it for the Yazid, but then he has a longer talk, uh, about 2 hours, Massacre Karbala historical analysis. He's very well read, a very nice speaker. When talking any topic, you like to listen, follow him. But here I think there are some important parts which are not analyzing speech. He's wrong, and then he wants to stick his traditional Sunni one. But the whole we want to present what they are saying, not whether they're correct or not. And then the abstract lets me show his figure. Look, this is him. And then he was more radical Salafi himself. So he's older than Umar Sulaiman, 10 years. Pakistani American, Texas, and he used to know Abu Ammar, and then um, he had well educated, was a chemical engineer first, and then go to the Sharia college in Saudi Arabia, in American University of Houston, Hadith and Islamic Theology, Islamic University in Medina, Saudi Arabia, which is the important one. And then he got a PhD in Yale, and actually was a classmate with this Gabriel Said Reynolds. And then he's thesis on Ibn Taymiyyah, the guy which I think can influence him. He's Hanbali himself, and then Ibn Taymiyyah, if you devoted to Ibn Taymiyyah, things usually are affecting you. But he was more radical anti-Shia when he was younger. Now is going, and then actually he himself said, uh, Ghazi was previously affiliated with Salafism, but has since left it. He now identifies himself as Wasatist, the middlers, and has been described as such. And they don't like him. These Wahhabis, they start to attack him. And sometimes, because he started to talk in academic language too, so his positions are not sometimes, but I feel is a good speaker. If you want to know how he talks, he's is informative. He's nice talking. I enjoyed listening to his talk. But this is a sensitive one. But look how he put the questions like this for this talk. Is it appropriate for you to kill the likes of me? This is sentence ascribed to Imam Hussain. I am the son of the daughter of your prophet. There is no other grandson of prophet who remains on the face of the earth aside from me. So look, this I think this one of the sayings of Imam Hussain said in the Karbalä battle. But then he says, okay, let's go journey back in history to visit one of the most controversial and misconstrued events in Islamic history. But remember, this is 12 years ago, 10, 12, 12, 11, 12 years ago. The massacre of Karbalä. Are Sunnis on the side of Yazid or the side of Hussein? And that's important because sometimes this simplified version of the Western published book, they want to make it like that. This is a trap we shouldn't go. Sunnis are not with Yazid and Shias with Hussein. Who is blamed for the death of Hussein? This part we will see sticks to the traditional view. Should we curse Yazid? Again, I kind of give his answer. He's in the third one. He does criticize Yazid, but he doesn't want to curse him. Okay. Join Dr. Yeah, okay, that's his thing. Uh, Now, the part which it has an introduction, I go to the talk and not all of it. Actually, he goes detail of the story of Karbala before. Is interesting, is fair. I mean, except some minor details, which I think and then influencing conclusion, but is matching the history, at least the way we have it in Tabari. But I'm not going to all those details. I have to be selective of the parts which is related more to the talk, the really character of I was saying, evaluation about his movement and also Yazid. So he says, I'm going to give a standard interpretation of Sunni Islam. And then he said, I'm taking it from the Sunni classical textbooks, Ibn Hajar, Ibn Kathir, which is the view which is largely agreed upon. Yeah, this is, I told you, the consensus, the latter consensus. You go to early century Sunnis is a little bit different. But with these groups, which mostly are that part of Mamluk or because we have first Sunnism and then we have Buyid which that 100, the golden century of Islam and golden century of Shias when they captured Baghdad, and then many sciences flourished and they were tolerant. And then Seljuks came, toppled Buyids, and then during the time of Buyids, both Shia and Sunni were relatively free. Okay, Shias have the upper hand. But when Seljuks come, they start persecute Shias very harshly. And then we have Fatimis, then we have Ismailis, and then all those wars and so on. Anyway, he said, I'm getting from Ibn Hajar, Ibn Kathir, and then more or less what I say, Sunnis agree on it. But then he says there is another version that is popularized by the Shia, and most of these comes from one particular person. And then it says most of it's coming Abi Makhnaf. Is complete, is named Lut ibn Yahya Sayyid al-Azadi. But the point he doesn't tell his audience, he is referring to second Abi Makhnaf, the one we said is distorted. And then he doesn't tell his audience where this Ibn Hajar, Ibn Kathir get the story. They got it from Tabari. And where Tabari got it, he mentions Tabari. And where Tabari got it from? Get that through Abu Bakr. But he pictured the story wrong. The Shia get it from Abi Makhnaf, and I will show it to you. We don't trust Abi Makhnaf, but we Sunni have good historians, and we get it from our historians. But we didn't say if you knock out Abi Makhnaf, you lost all the history of Iraq of the first century. He's the scholar, and he's by any standard is absolutely good, fair, objective scholar. Yeah, he says Abi Makhnaf was the first early historian to write a detailed booklet about the massacre of Karbala. He mixes between Abi Makhnaf 1 and 2, despite that Salafi guy distinguished it. On this PhD from Yale, it doesn't do that. He called it Makhnal and Hussein, and this booklet become the standard version of full of lurid details, full of lot of things that allegedly took place. From our perspective, this author and this book are not authoritative. All our scholars have said this person is not somebody that can be trusted. If you don't trust him, you don't have any history of Jamal, Safain, Mukhtar, everything. Tabari is trusted, but he kind of deceives his audience in narrations because, as I said, Ibn Hajar and Ibn Kasir getting it from Tabari, and Tabari get it from him. And Tabari mentions the importance of Tabari is that explicitly mentions this paragraph is from this source, and that's the book is very important. This person is not somebody that can be trusted in narration because he theologically is inclined toward the group to other group, the Shias, and therefore he has a version of events that we do not agree with, and we will not really be concentrating on that version of events. As I said, our version by and large will be Ibn Kathir, Ibn Hajar, the standard Sunni historian. So this is a fallacy or mistakes, a confusion he makes. And then if we go, this historian is that side, that historian the other side, we don't accept it. We don't can argue that in his history of Islam is not much sectarian. Yeah. And then at least Abi Makhnaf is the source of much of these, and he's very fair. And in any other thing you have. Now, it comes for a long part, which is about what the Sunnis viewed Ahl Bayt, because I didn't discuss it before thoroughly. So I use his sentences, all is positive, but look, it's mostly loving them. But loving them is just loving them, not much beyond that. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah firmly believe that I read this because this part was missing in the three sets of lectures. Ahlul Bayt, Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, I firmly believe Ahlul Bayt have a very high rank, are the most blessed of all families. We love them with the genuine love. We love them with genuine love between the two extremes. On the one hand, we have those, and they did exist, they still exist. This still exists is interesting. He said himself. Some of those guys in Syria who consider that Ahlul Bayt to be like any other family or even worse than this, they curse them, some of them, and that has been a trend that existed there, and there are still some people like this. So this is interesting. But the play with the word is important. We call it usually Ahlul Bayt. We rarely call it Ahlul Bayt. He starts with Ahlul Bayt, move it to Ahlul Bayt. Ahlul Bayt is Quran. But Ahlul Bayt allow him to open up, make it wider. Make it Ahlul Bayt. Uh, and that's what we'll see one of the difference there. And I mean, include more people in Ahlul Bayt. And on the other hand, we have the other trend of Islam. These trends consider Ahlul Bayt to be above and beyond other families in a supernatural manner. We don't say everybody, but except the Imams. And they give them powers, and they give them privileges, and give them attributes that we believe only belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe that Ahlul Bayt are the most respected family in the whole world if they're righteous. Okay, that's correct. So the Moments, believers, and the Muslims among them have a double blessing. They are believers and they are Ahlul Bayt, and the companions among them have a triple blessing. So blessing being Ahlul Bayt and being Moment, and companion have a triple blessing. The companion he mentions explicitly Ali and Fatima, Hazrat Ali, Hazrat Fatima. Others, they're Ahlul Bayt, they're companion, and they're believers, and therefore we love them with a love that is triple if they are characterized by all of these characteristics. We firmly affirm the blessings mentioned in Quran regarding them, as like the verse of Tatir, and Nama yuridullah liyusab ankum ar-rijs ahlal bayt wa yutahhirakum tatira, that God wants to purify you of any filth, and Allah wants to cleanse you any good cleansing. This is the Quran, the Ahlul Bayt is mentioned here. And then he explicitly mentions the core of Ahlul Bayt are Imam Ali, Hazrat Fatima, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain. He mentions the Hadith of Kasab, which is again Prophet invite the Hazrat Ali, Hazrat Fatima, Imam Hussain underneath of the cloak. And then he only mentioned this part of the Hadith of Kasab, which is said, I think, Sahih Muslim or one of the important books. I don't know, I have it here. And oh Allah, these are my Ahlul Bayt, these are my family. So come very emphasized by the Prophet. These are my family. He said, we follow the advice Prophet gave in Sahih Muslim regarding his family. That I remind you, they narrated hadith from Prophet, which told the Sahaba and of people coming after them, companions and his generation after him. And the Prophet said, I remind you by God and by the rights of God for the rights of my family. So that's interesting. And then he doesn't think the rights of my family is more important than just loving them. And it doesn't specify what these rights Prophet was worried about. But he mentions the Prophet repeated 3 times. And then, so because of it repeatedly love them with a love that is above and beyond any other family love. But we also said if a person is not righteous, if a person is sinful, then it doesn't matter what his bloodline is. Okay, we agree that his sins are one thing and his bloodline is another, and the person's bloodline would never save him from the consequence of his own deeds. We base this on our prophetic hadith that said that this is common terminology, that whoever's deeds pulled him back pulled back his blood will not I know, okay, whoever's deeds pulled him back, his blood will not push him forward. If you do sin, you do mistake, you're pulling back, you're going backward. But just by lineage will not things right for you. So we just say that because a person is of descendant of Ahlul Bayt does not make him an angel. It is possible that some of the Ahlul Bayt will commit sins for these things they are responsible for. And the other difference is that who consider Ahlul Bayt for the Shias mostly, he said that descendant of Hazrat Fatima, but he said with Sunnis, first we consider the wives of the Prophet, but besides that, other descendants of Ali ibn Abi Talib, from other besides the Fatima, and also the children of the brother of Imam Ali or the grandchildren of Abu Talib, like Jafar ibn Abi Talib, Aqil ibn Abi Talib, and also they want to get here, the Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, so in the time of Abbas, they expand the idea of al-Bayt to include Abbas and then the whole descendants of Abbasids. But that usually can match with Bani Hashim and Isham Homs, but Ahlul Bayt is not. And then, but he subscribed to this widening view of the meaning who's Ahlul Bayt. Now, there are many parts in the discussion because we have short time and I want to finish it. Um, I really skip. He goes all the discussion of the life of Imam Hussain Yazid. Again, last lecture I mentioned two things which I think are very important for their narration. One is still again mentioned that the story of the Constantinople, because Yazid participated of the some expedition against Constantinople. His sins are all forgiven, and the sins are all forgiven before he commit all these crimes. And then the other thing they mention, and that's important, they think Yazid still was the Muslim ruler. I mean, and then I said that coin and other examples we have, they deny the poetry now that some Sunni scholars accept that it shows Yazid was not believing in Islam, was kafir. Uh, but as I said, that the two discoveries we kind of related to issue of Western scholars we mentioned last time is important. One showing that he explicitly breaking the norm for Islamic norms. Those coins are important. Coins are in all the ancient civilization right now. Even the bills right now, the governments are very careful what's on pictured on the what they is like an advertisement. Is the hand of people. Is sign of authority. Now it still is important, but ancient times was very very till 20 years ago was very important. For example, to having in God we trust in the dollar bill, it was a big deal in the 1960s in the United States. All this stuff are important. So when you look, he changed totally those coins, erasing it of any Islamic resemblance, imaging himself like the Sassanid king, semi-divine, changing the calendar like the Shah in Iran did, changing the calendar from Islamic Hijra calendar to the, I don't know, royal calendar, which was one of the reasons of dissatisfaction of people from him. He completely ignored the Hijra and it makes the beginning of the calendar by his beginning of his, I mean, not his father, even not his dynasty, himself. The guy was self-absorbed, narcissist, self-absorbed. So, I mean, this is a good example, which putting in front of, because there are many details he wants to still uh, whitewash Yazid. And then one of the things he says regarding Muharram, okay, which the truth is that, when Imam Hussain the whole intercept the caravan Imam Hussain, and then they moved together to Muharram till Sa'd ibn Umar ibn Sa'd came. I think they must be in the Karbala about second or third of Muharram to 10th. We have 5, 6, 7 days of negotiation. And then he says not the exaggerated 40 days. I don't know any Shia book, even Mullah Ali Aghai Darbandi says 40 days. All right. So he said the shot. How can somebody have 40 days? 40 days from 8 of Zihajjah, which Imam Hussain left Mecca to the moment he passed, 10th of Muharram is 32 days. So who says 40 days? He kind of throws stuff. The Shias say these exaggerations, but we Sunni we say it right. But the point is that uh, he talks about negotiation, which true. He mentions that Imam Hussein, when Omar Sabt intercept and then start to negotiate, uh, you know, there were one back and forth, but in somewhere in the second back and forth, which Ibn Ziyad said Imam Hussein should come and do bay'ah with me in the palace. And then Imam Hussein didn't agree. And then at the next negotiation, Imam said, okay, I can do one of these. Let me go. Even tell her, okay, the Kufans, I came here, Kufan wanted me. If they don't want me, okay, I'm going back. Or he had one thing, that direct negotiation with Yazid, but I disputed, but I mentioned it. We should look to it. That he said that Imam Hussein told Umar ibn Sa'd, okay, uh, I'm not going to Ibn Ziyad because Ibn Ziyad was very harsh and he said you should come bay'ah with me. He played too much emphasis on the blame Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad was 28 years old, was rash, harsh, arrogant, pompous. I mean, something like that. But he mentions that Imam Hussein said, okay, took me to, if I have to negotiate with somebody, I'll go to court of Yazid. I don't think this is true. I think this is a fabrication after that. But he's not direct. It doesn't say Imam Hussein says, I'm going to bay'ah, but maybe he wants to expose the Yazid in front of the courtier that uh, you're not uh, deserving to be caliph. But anyway, then exile to distant lands, which we have it in our books, that Imam Hussein says, okay, let me go somewhere else. If you don't want me, I go to Sarhadat. But anyway, because this is a narration story of the Yasser Qazi, says Ibn Ziyad arrogant refusal. Said no, either my hand or war. And then he sent Shaykh ibn Joshan to be sure Ibn Sa'd, Umar ibn Sa'd is not backing up as enforcement. And then he mentions some of defection from Umayyad army, like Hortu Hussein side. Let me go faster. I don't go to, did I, the parts they play a lot on it, and especially Yasser Qazi is not as positive, which Umar Suleiman was. But remember, this is 12 years ago too. They all want to say against some element of that ill-conceivedness that Imam Hussein was younger, but they don't say how much younger. They say he's young. I'm saying he's 57 years old. You're talking he's young. He's 57 years old when he's going. Oh, he said the senior companions advised him against the journey. Yeah, he knew it. He answered them. He never mentioned what the answer he gave them. He knew that. And then at the time he's going, he has the letters come to him. He has to go. If he didn't go, they say, okay, we invited him, he didn't come. But they list Abdullah ibn Abbas, strong opposition. And some of these are after fact. I'm not sure they're true. Some after things happen, oh, we said, oh, we told him don't do that. Hussein's rather die elsewhere than make a haram a battlefield. One of the reasons Imam Hussein wants to leave Mecca because they intended to assassinate him during Hajj season and nobody would notice it. So the blood will be shed without any effect. I think he knew he will be die no matter what. That's the other thing people not notice because these guys do not mention any parts. We have in history says Yazid, tell the governor of Medina, get from him the bay'at. Tell Ibn Ziyad, I send you either get him bay'at or kill him. But then sending assassins. So he doesn't mention Yasir Qazi. But when assassinate Imam Hussein, he knew no matter what he will assassinate it. He will be killed because Yazid is too obnoxious and so on. So it's better do it in such a way has some effect, not be dying somewhere and then the guy come to funeral. say I'm sorry. Of the Oman's profile, they start to list. I don't need to go to that. That oh, this Sahaba comes said don't do that. This Sahaba comes says do that. Muhammad Hanafi said, you want to push that somehow. Look, this is a punchline. Hussein made emotional rather than wise decision, which I cannot. I have to present what he's saying. Okay, this is a line still. If you, I don't tell you, I'm sugarcoated what some of them they say. He's not Omar Suleiman, and I think he's more typical of what you hear. Still positive, but okay, let's go. I will finish in 5 minutes. And then he started at the end to assign the blame. And as I said, the strategy is to give Yazid off the hook, ignoring all the earlier messages, and then they concentrate. Okay, those 5 6 days negotiation Karbala between Umar ibn Sa'd and Imam Hussain tell Umar ibn Sa'd, Umar ibn Sa'd sent to Ibn Ziyad, and back and forth. He said Yazid was unaware because they couldn't uh, communicate to Yazid because communication to the Syria take 2.5 weeks. Okay, that's true. But the whole environment, the whole context, the sending of the Ziyad, the whole forcing the Bay'ah, the whole letter sent to the governor of Medina, all have put the context. And then they start even to blame people of the Kufa foremost because people of Kufa invited him, almost they didn't stick with him. They start to blame people of Kufa. People of Kufa are responsible and so on. Then they blame Ibn Ziyad. And as I said, the strategy is to blame Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad was wrong, was harsh, was rash. Ibn Ziyad didn't respect the family of the Prophet, the honor of the grand son of Prophet. Yazid wouldn't do that. Yazid didn't order him. This is the classic strategy, as I said, they do. And then they blame, okay, as I said, the hierarchy, the first lecture I showed to you. Then Umar ibn Sa'd, because he was scared, couldn't stand to Ibn Ziyad. Then the direct killers, the real actual murderers, are Shimr and Sinan. And then the Yazid, okay, he said, Yasser Ghazi said, okay, there are some people that are trying to absolve Yazid of any blame. And then he harshly criticized them. And he even said, even Ibn Taymiyyah criticized them. And the reason the criticism is that Yazid didn't order it. Yazid wasn't happy Imam Hussein was murdered, but then he didn't punish the murderers. So that clearly shows maybe he wasn't unhappy of the murder, at least. But then they claim, yes, he showed regret, but showed regret after the whole environment of the court changes after as it is Zainab talk. But anyway, let's go faster. What is the conclusions he get? Karbala is, yeah, this is the one he emphasized. Okay, Karbala is important historical tragedy, but it's not any point important as a theological doctrine in Sunni Islam. So, I mean, it's not part of theology of Shia, but at least it's very important, shaping the Shia identity, meaning he has some theories of the formation of Shiism, which I'm not going to go through that. But, one of the punchline, which was really hurtful, start to compare with Imam Hassan, and then because he told the story of Imam Hassan, and then he says Imam Hassan was the older one and wiser one, act wisely, avoid war. He make a peace treaty for Muawiyah to save lives. But Imam Hussein was a little bit more emotional, and then this is how the stories are. Imam Hussein was more agitating. Imam Hassan was more calmer. Even the time of peace treaty, the Sunni books had that Imam Hussein objected, but Imam Hassan explained, and Imam Hussein accepted because Imam Hassan was older brother. But that's exactly what I'm saying is important to tell. Yazid is not the second Muawiyah. Yazid even is a break from Muawiyah. Yazid is outrightly, completely, in full force is against Islamic norm. If Yazid had ruled, completely Islam would wipe out. Muawiyah still rule in the name of the Islam, in the name of Prophet Muhammad. Use the Hijrah time, using coins, Amir al-Mu'minin. Muawiyah make a coin, and we have the silver coins, which for Iran, which is written in Old Farsi. He wrote it, Muawiyah Amir al-Mu'minin. Although per se still is a neutral title, but at least write it. But Yazid is complete break. And then they don't notice that uprising. And Imam Hussain didn't uprise against Muawiyah, but against Yazid. So they don't want to notice they're different, and that's we shouldn't fall in that trap too. Yes, because other we all sometimes ask why Imams didn't uprise against Abbasid. Abbasid killed more people, and he said that Yasir Qazi. Oh yes, he didn't kill many other people killed more. It's not the number of killing, number of how many wines you drink per day or other stuff. It is the whole. What is the real context of what a push was, which Imam Hussein could not be first, and would not be, and then he had to step. Balanced Sunni approach, love for Ahlul Bayt without extremism. He talked about these Nasibis. It seems he noticed some of them are there and they're coming on the forefront, maybe from those, you know, Daeshi movements. And then he criticized them, criticized Shia. And then he claims we are the true followers of Ahlul Bayt. We seek the middle path, and that's it. I think I give a summary of it. It's good. It has many positive points, but still we have to know. Uh, I think this is a little bit retrograde, even more than Ibn Khaldun goes somewhere between Ibn Khaldun and Arabi. I stop here with this verses. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي في الجنة. Thank you for patience. Thank you for attention. And I stop sharing. Okay.